Musical papers, which you used to read, were started to slag us off because we hadn't done anything, because it took 5 months to record. And I remember with great glee seeing in one of the papers, oh, the Beatles have dried up. There's nothing coming from them. They've been in the studio, they can't think what they're doing. And I was sort of sitting rubbing my hands saying, you just wait.
Love an album but find there's always at least one song on it that's not up to the standard of the rest, and this podcast is for you. Welcome to Trimming the Musical Fat. I'm Paul Nicholson.
And I'm Stephen Nicholson.
And thank you for joining us for the latest Trimming the Classic episode, a Patreon exclusive. And the subject of today's episode is an album that frequently tops the greatest albums of all time polls, the Beatles' 1967 classic Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
It was 20 years ago today.
My guests and I will pick a song from the album that we like the least. We'll also select our favourite songs and discuss the album as a whole.
1, 2, 3, 4.
There was total craziness, and there had been for years around the Beatles.
This religious controversy.
The famous "more popular than Jesus" remark from John.
Are you sorry about what you said?
You can't say too much, though, that's the trouble.
They were burning records in Memphis. The guys went on stage and thought they might get shot.
Brian Epstein was going to cancel the tour.
I am concerned. On what account? Security.
George said, I don't care. They'll only buy more records to replace the ones they burn.
Do you think that you're going to be going your own ways instead of being...
No. If we're not listened to, and we can't even hear ourselves, then we can't improve.
They were trying to push back this image of the cuddly four mop tops.
Swing in London was an immense movement.
They were out there leading the revolution.
We don't want to do what we've done already.
Where do you go next? You make great art.
They had an idea of making a kind of alter ego called Sgt. Pepper.
Huge ambition.
They were the first people to do albums like this that weren't just soundtracks for dancing.
Dozens and dozens of takes.
Even the engineers were amazed with what the Beatles were asking them to do.
The anticipation was enormous. Every shop you went into, it was playing. It was an event.
The Maharishi had a fast track to inner bliss and enlightenment, but that was where the news of Brian Epstein's death reached them.
We can't pay tribute in words.
Paul went public about LSD.
I don't think my fans are going to take drugs because I did. But as a public figure, you've got a responsibility. No, it's you've got the responsibility, not to spread this now.
It's a great window into an incredible era of change. If you study the Beatles, studying the 60s.
It is amazing how many generations are still listening to it.
It is the ultimate album. Meant so much, and it still does.
Time to introduce our guest. Welcome, lifelong Beatles fan and our lifelong dad, Martin Nicholson. How are you today, Martin?
I'm fine, Paul. I'm fine.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to this tonight.
Yeah, talking about any excuse to talk about the Beatles.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start talking about the Beatles. So we're going to start with 3 questions. So first question is, which 2 Beatles members did not participate in the recording of She's Leaving Home?
I think it was John Lennon and Ringo Starr. But I could be wrong. I think it was they two. I think it was George Harrison and Paul McCartney. No? There we go.
Do you want me to give you the answer?
Yeah. What was the answer for that one?
So Paul McCartney and John Lennon.
They were the 2 that
yeah.
coming from. Yeah.
Because when you hear the vocal harmonies, you hear John Lennon in the background. Which legendary American musician played the album's title track in London mere days after the album release, and Paul McCartney always goes on about every single concert for the last 20 years.
Jimi Hendrix.
That's right, yeah.
Hey, it was 20 years ago today. Sgt. Pepper told the band to play. They were going in and out of town, but the guarantee to bring them down. So now I introduce to you, been there all these years. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
And how many singles were released from the Sgt. Pepper album?
Yeah, but by the Beatles.
By the Beatles themselves, yeah.
None of them.
Sorry, yes, yeah. That's correct. You're correct.
Yeah. I could tell you ones that were released as a single by the people.
That's right, yeah. Most famous being Joe Cocker.
That's right, yes.
So Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band is the 8th studio album by the English rock band The Beatles. It was released in May 1967 and it was produced by Sir George Martin. The album was lauded by critics for its innovations in songwriting, production and graphic design, for bridging a cultural divide between popular music and high art, and for reflecting the interests of the contemporary youth and the counterculture. Its release was a defining moment of 1960s pop culture, heralding the summer of love, while the album's reception achieved full cultural legitimization for pop music and recognition for the medium as a genuine art form. So the album spent 27 weeks at number 1 in the UK album charts and 15 weeks at number 1 in the US album charts. As of 2011, it sold 32 million copies worldwide, and it's the third highest selling album ever in the UK and the highest selling studio album. And obviously the other two albums are ABBA Gold at number 2 and Queen's Greatest at number 1, but they're compilation albums. So Sgt. Pepper's the top studio album.
It's called the first concept album. It doesn't go anywhere. Mr. Kite, all my contributions have absolutely nothing to do with this idea of Sgt. Pepper and his band. But it works, because we said it worked, and that's how it appeared. Yeah. But it was not as put together as Pet sounds. Yeah. And it doesn't have a concept. It starts out with Sgt. Pepper and introduces Billy Shears, and that's the end, apart from the so-called reprise.
Right.
Otherwise, every other song could have been on any other album.
Right. It's the reprise.
Right. Mr. Kite could have gone anywhere. Lucy could have gone anywhere. A Day in the Life could have gone anywhere. So it's not really, there's no concept there.
We'll start with you, Father. When did you first hear the album?
Well, I heard it was actually hard, but the Radio 1, I think, had just came out then, and that's where you basically heard it. Up until before then, you had to listen to Radio Luxembourg. So yeah, I would say when Radio 1 played it, I think, it's at the same time Radio 1 went on air.
Yeah.
But fantastic album, great song, very, very exciting.
Yeah.
Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Because you've got the whole package, haven't you? The colour of it as well. It's very colourful. It reflects that era of colour. Right?
It reflects the time. I think it reflects the time, the 60s. But it was so unusual. Not just the songs of the album, but the album cover itself. The words on the back. You couldn't wait to open up and read what it said. And I would say most of the songs in the album brings back memories of a particular time, as a lot of the Beatles songs did.
Yeah.
So exciting. And from, like, She's Leaving Home to A Day in the Life, completely different songs. You couldn't make out it was the same group or band, as they're called now. It's so different. Great mixture, yeah.
Yeah. And Stephen, what about you? When did you first hear the album?
I would have heard it for the first time in the mid-80s, probably when I was homesick from school and bored, and probably went to Dad's record collection. And I think of all the records that are in there, Sgt. Pepper always stood out just because of the cover. I think you always kept it at the end as well. So I think the album cover is just so vibrant and bright, and it was a gatefold as well. It had the lyrics on it, and all these things were quite novel at the time, weren't they? And I think the other reason is because it had When I'm 64 on it, which is obviously a kid's song. You learned that at school. Yeah. So it had When I'm 64 on it. So that was kind of your inroad to the album. So yeah, I've loved the album since the 1980s, yeah.
You're talking about the album cover. It was so hard to have an album cover different, because if you look at the album covers back then, they were really striking album covers. So to have something completely different, it had to be completely different. And it did.
Yeah. And
you, Paul?
Yeah. Well, probably a bit like yourself, Stephen, probably heard it in the 80s. And I think because we watched the complete videos, the complete Beatles video that Dad had, and that influenced, that kind of made you want to look out a lot of the songs. but Sergeant Pepper was always probably the most famous, so it was always one that you would go to, and the cover and everything about it, and I think what was interesting, I remember in the early 90s, Stephen, you got the next album we're going to do, Abbey Road, as well. You got them on CD, and I remember the person saying to Dad at the time, because I think Dad had bought them, and he said, "Oh, actually, you won't believe this. This is for my son." And they responded something like, well, "Actually, that's quite normal. A lot of kids are, like, younger people are getting into the Beatles." I mean, I remember when you got the CDs, the original CDs.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And what did you think of the album then, Dad? What did you think of the album?
It was, how can I put it? To me, it was mind blowing. Just to think that it was a 4-piece band and Sir George Martin, and to come up with that sound. I mean, I know Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane came out before that, but then you've got this album in front of you, and it's so many different songs, different tunes, and they're all absolutely fantastic. I mean, you've got George Harrison's, for instance, Within You, Without You. I'm not a great fan of that, but as I've got older, strangely enough, I can listen to it and appreciate it. But when I was 16, 17, I didn't get into that. But all of the other songs, you couldn't wait to play it over and over and over and over, and that's what we done. Played it over and over and over. As I say, a lot of the songs on that album have special memories for me, and no doubt for a lot of other people. And you tend to find that with single records. You think, oh, I remember that particular time, I remember that particular thing. But this album, each of the songs puts you in a place that you can remember, which is, after all these years, is amazing. Yeah. You know, I really, it was a complete change to the Beatles that I knew, and Rubber Soul, and all the songs and albums before that. This was a complete and utter mind-blowing experience, if you like. Listen to that compared to other bands of that era. Yeah. And the Beatles always were trailblazers, and all the other groups followed.
Yeah.
And all the other groups after, even this album, actually did come out with some fantastic sounds and great songs.
Yeah.
But again, it was the Beatles' tail.
Because there's always that, you're talking about Trailblazers, there's always that story about the Beatles and the Beach Boys, and like Paul McCartney, particularly Paul McCartney, almost like they would egg each other on, and then Brian Wilson had done Pet Sounds, and that influenced Paul McCartney to do Sgt. Pepper, and by that point Brian Wilson just gave up. You know, he couldn't compete, which was sad as well, because I think he had a lot of problems with his health at that point, but yeah, so that was, it was like a healthy competition.
Oh, without a doubt, it was good. There was a good competition. But you're talking about Pet Sounds. I didn't particularly like that album, and everybody raved, but that's just my particular taste. Oh, I didn't particularly like the album, but yeah, it was good. A good challenge. You know, different groups coming through and trying to catch up the Beatles all the time. The Beatles, that was the beauty of it, Paul. The Beatles always wanted to stay ahead. They always wanted to
be the first to do things.
Tracks, you know, things like that on their albums and the singles.
Yeah.
They were always expecting something different. And again, I would say, people thought that the Beatles had peaked at Sgt. Pepper. I would say maybe they did, but they never went down after that. When they were making their albums, they levelled off and stayed. They never dipped. The albums they produced, I'm not sure about albums later on that were produced by other people, or songs that were put together by other people to make an album. I'm talking about studio albums, and they reached the peak on Sgt. Pepper, and they levelled off, but they never dipped.
Yeah.
And you can't say that about a lot of groups.
Yeah. And Stephen, what about you? What do you think of the album?
Oh, I love it. I think what's great about it is the cover of the album promises vibrancy, colour, zaniness, invention, and the music, and the music is an absolute mirror of that, which is great. And I mean, it is quite rightly regarded as one of the greatest albums of all time. And I mean, it is full of invention. And I remember, I think it was Revolution in the Head, the book, the Beatles book, great book. And I remember reading that, and I thought it was quite right in what he said. I think he was comparing Sgt. Pepper to Revolver, and I think he says on a song-by-song basis, Revolver is a better album if you compare the songs directly.
I think I agree, yeah.
For Spirit, for being an album that works as a whole,
and a continuous song went into the next song.
So as an album that works together, perhaps succeeds it in that respect. It works.
That's right.
So I thought that was very true. It just works. I suppose that's what they set out to do. A single piece of art where everything does flow, and they achieved that. It's brilliant.
It covers everything, doesn't it? Stories, songs, art. It's got the whole thing there. A wee personal note with your granny. The previous album, especially in the winter time, I used to go into the room, keep my light off, and I'd put on A Day in the Life and just lie in the dark and listen to it. Your granny would come in, turn that light on, for goodness sake, I can't see what I'm doing. But I used to just like lie in the dark and listen to that song. It made it so scary if you like. It really was different.
Yeah.
How about you, Paul?
Yes, I think it's obviously a brilliant album, legendary. Sgt. Pepper, along with Abbey Road, are probably the most famous album covers as well, and they've been parodied so much as well. But like what you're saying, I think it's like a concept album, although it's maybe not set out to be, but it's like because it all flows into each other. And I think its timing as well, it was almost like it was Summer of Love and the colours and everything, and it epitomises that period. But I don't, like, song for song, it's not the best Beatles album in my opinion, but I think it grabbed that moment in time, and that was what was special about it as well, the timing of it, and it just, I think it took the Beatles as far as they could go in that direction, and then after it, I think they still did stuff that was as good, but it was like they went as far as they could in that direction, and it's probably an album that I would say probably over the years has become less it's almost like years ago, Sgt. Pepper was seen as the best Beatles album, but actually now I don't think it's seen as highly maybe as like Revolver or Abbey Road or The White Album or maybe even Rubber Soul. It feels like song for song it's maybe not seen as highly, but the significance of it is like the peak of the Beatles in the album sense, the significance. So Dad, what's your favourite song on that? In fact, I know the answer, but tell us anyway. What's your favourite song on the album?
Well, I have to say A Day in the Life. It's so out there, really. It's completely different. I know Strawberry Fields was mind-blowing, but that's another one. A Day in the Life and Tomorrow Never Knows is another great song, but not off the album. But also like the Sgt. Pepper start and end of the album.
The reprise.
Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds is a fantastic song. It really is. And again, it brings back lots and lots of memories. It's the kind of song, once you get that in you can't stop singing it. It's just, but I would say, A Day in the Life, probably followed by the opening to Sgt. Pepper's.
Okay.
Track. But yourself, what's yours?
That's a good question, actually. I would probably say maybe She's Leaving Home.
Yeah,
it's a lovely song like that. Either that or I'll go for that because you've said A Day in the Life, so that would have been my other one. I'll go with just the harmonies are just amazing in it. So I love.
And then you talk about She's Leaving Home again. Things that bring back memories. There used to be a Scottish DJ on Radio 1 called Stuart Edney, and he used to have a 5-minute segment in his programme about people that have disappeared, the daughter or the son. And that was the part of the segment, She's Leaving Home. That's what he used to play at the start of his segment and the end of it. So all these songs have different memories for people.
Yeah. And what about you, Steve? What's your favourite track on the album?
Always changes. And one day it could be A Day in the Life. The next it could be With a Little Help from My Friends. It's just always changing, but I think at this moment in time it would be Sgt. Pepper and its reprise. I've always loved that from when I first heard it back in the 80s. Brilliant. So I'd go with the title track and its reprise.
What an opening track for an album!
Oh yeah,
track.
And what have you heard? The isolated vocals. Paul McCartney's vocals are absolutely amazing. Like if you just isolate the vocals and hear the vocals, absolutely amazing vocals. The rock. No, you go.
You don't think the Beatles were talking about Sgt. Pepper? They never really made the songs. They went as far as they could go technology-wise. We're talking about earlier on, 2-track, 4-track. They couldn't make another album like that because there's nowhere else to go. So I think they had to revert back to what they always done, which was catchy songs and some, different things like that, but songs that you won't forget. But I think that's where the Sgt. Pepper peaked. After that technology beat them, they couldn't go anywhere else.
Having said that, or saying that, but Magical Mystery Tour was pretty similar in that sense, like I Am the Walrus. Although that wasn't an album in the UK, it was an EP, but in America, it's kind of seen now as an official album. It's looked on as an official album. But Magical Mystery Tour was very colourful as well, and it was continuing that theme almost. Yeah.
But the video got slated. The video from. But you're talking about the album. I actually ordered it. I've got that album. I ordered it from America.
That's right. I remember that. EP. Capital. Yeah. And now, probably the hardest question, or it might be the easiest question. Even though it's an amazing album, we've got to find one song. If we had to leave one song off it, our least favourite, what would it be? I think I know what it probably. I think it might be similar here.
Well, I would say Within You, Without You with George Harrison, but having said that, as I say, now that I've got a lot older, I can sit and listen to that song without thinking I'm going to skip the track. Whereas when I was younger, when this came out, I would skip that track, basically. But now I can sit and listen. So that's my one.
Same for me, and it's always been Millie's favourite. That's never changed. And, I mean, it's obviously Eastern influence and everything, and musically it's interesting, but it doesn't have the same killer melodies as the other songs on the albums. Although I will say, it's on the Love album, which is based on the hit show Cirque du Soleil show, Beatles Love, which is performed in Las Vegas, and I was lucky enough to see it. An amazing show, and during the show and on the album, they do Without You with the Tomorrow Never Knows.
Yeah, that's good.
The drums, that's a better version.
Yes, it works better, doesn't it?
Brilliant.
It works better.
Better version. So if it was that version of it, then I think we'd be in trouble. So that's excellent.
Yeah.
What about you?
Exactly the same as you guys. It's just a song. I mean, it's quite a long song as well. Is it maybe the longest? Either that or A Day in the Life. It's like 5. It's like 5. It kind of, for me, it sticks out like a sore thumb in the album. It just doesn't seem to belong there. But then, by the same token, it's a shame for George Harrison because that was the only song he had in the album. Because he had 3 songs on Revolver. But actually, even if you compare it to Love You Too, I actually think that's a better kind of Indian style song. From Revolver, I actually think that's a better song than Within You, Without You. Maybe it's because it's shorter as well. Maybe, I don't know. Yeah.
Or what was the B-side when he done?
Without going out of your name. The Inner Light.
Yeah.
Inner Light.
That Old Brown Shoe? No, Inner Light. Yeah, that's a good song. That's a better song.
It is. It's got a nice melody, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. And it's shorter as well. That's it. Yeah. Within You, Without You. So, Sgt. Pepper's band is playing us out to the exit, so time to bring this episode to a close. Thanks to Daddy Sgt. Pepper for joining us, and thank you for listening.
I love it. I love it.